Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College. And with our producing partners, the New York Film Academy, welcome to our wildly successful series, Conversations on Essential Cinema. Tonight, The Godfather Part II, with our special guest, actor Mark Feuerstein. As you know, The Godfather is a fan favorite for everyone, but we didn't know whether the show 1 or 2. And we asked Mark, and he picked 2. So we'll talk about that, why he picked 2 over 1. Of course, you all know Mark from television and films. He starred in Royal Pains. He and his wife, Dana Klein, created a television show, 9JKL. And if you live in New York City, you know exactly what that means. And it was a really wonderful show and a family show in so many ways. I remember seeing him early in West Wing. He's been in a lot of films. One of my favorites is In Her Shoes. He was in The Muse. He's really funny in that. What I love about that mentioning is that also co-starred Sharon Stone, and you all remember when we did Casablanca with Sharon Stone a number of months ago, so it's 6 Degrees of Folk Separation. He was in What Women Want, and he was in Woman on Top. Let me tell you something about this Mark Feuerstein guy. He knows something about women. He knows a lot about women. He was also in, oh, that's right. I talked about this last night. For those of you who were watching, folks, last night we showed a new documentary film, Final Account, about the last generation of people who supported Hitler. And then I said, and our guest for tomorrow night, Mark Feuerstein, co-starred in a Holocaust, really good Holocaust film, Defiance, and I think he played one of the Bielski brothers. And that has another 6 degrees of separation, Mark, because the director of that film, Ed Zwick, has been a guest at Folks at least twice, if not perhaps even 3 times. So welcome, Mark Feuerstein. Hey, Mark.
Hello, Thane Rosenbaum.
So we're going to have so much fun.
I am so happy to be here.
This is going to be great. If you have any questions for Mark, you've got the Q&A box. Maybe hopefully we'll have some time at the end to ask him some questions. If you're watching us live on Facebook, we have a very large Facebook Live audience as well. Welcome. We love that you're watching us on Facebook. Go to folks.org and give us your email address so we can send you direct information about upcoming events. So let's start, Mark. The Godfather 2. You picked 2. Now, people don't know this necessarily about you, but you're a really smart guy. You went to Princeton. You were a Fulbright scholar. Your big brother is a big-time Wall Street lawyer. Your dad, Harvey, who I know is a legendary Wall Street lawyer. Oftentimes, you're playing lawyers in shows. I've seen that a number of times, or slick advertising guys, or really sort of smart agents. So the question here about the choice of 1 and 2, why is it we've never heard, when we talk about Rocky 1 and Rocky 2, not conventions on conversations on essential cinema, but just regular movies. Rocky 2, nobody picks over Rocky 1. Jaws 2, nobody picks over Jaws 1. Miss Congeniality, you never pick 2 over 1. I mentioned that because I remember you co-starred with Sandra Bullock in Practical Magic.
Wow, Thane, you are unbelievable. Your research.
Mark, this is what I do on game day.
Amazing. You bring it, Thane.
I do bring it, Mark. I spend the day trying to come up with cool connections, and I had a Sandra Bullock one. So why is it, do you think, that 2, and you can answer as an actor maybe, to say, well, actually I think the parts are better, you might say. And why is it that the audience sometimes says, yeah, I love them both, but I like 2 more than 1? Why do you think?
Well, first of all, let's just agree that they're both masterpieces. And I'm so psyched that we get to talk about this movie today together because I love it so much. But Godfather 1 is kind of neater. It gives you what you want, and you kind of feel good the whole way through because it's this epic story. And Vito Corleone is a character who's, even though he's a mafioso, he's sort of unassailably noble and you love him. But this one is messy and you don't feel good. halfway through the movie, Michael Corleone is one of the worst people on the planet. And by the end, truly just a horrible guy. He's killed his brother. He's alienated his entire family. He has ruined the entire legacy of the Corleone family that Vito, who came from Italy with nothing, built himself. So I like it for all that complexity. And of course, the acting performances in this movie are off the charts. But it's crazy to think that this movie might have been so different. I don't know if you know some of the fun factoids about Godfather 2, but Coppola didn't want to direct it. Right. He was ready to give it up. And in fact, Paramount met with a young Martin Scorsese to direct Godfather 2, and they passed on him. They said, we won't do it. And so Coppola got to make all these demands. In order for him to direct it, he demanded that he get to write it, that Robert Evans be nowhere near the set.
Which, if I remember, that was a big deal with the first one, right? Because Robert Evans was very unhappy about the over budget and about the time it took. So
I don't know the details of what he was unhappy about, but clearly Coppola was unhappy with him. And yes, you're right. Like Evans was micromanaging him the whole time. Yes. So Coppola finally got to make it his way. And when you see what that led to, you can't deny that he was one of the greatest directors. He's one of the great directors of all time. That's
such a great answer. I hadn't considered, I was going to give you something else to think about, which I will, but I hadn't thought about the first point. It's a good, I like the word messy, but I like what you're saying, right? If you think about art, you go, well, the lead character, right, is he a sympathetic character? And you're right, Vito Corleone is avuncular and sweet and kind, and even the opening scene, which I was going to talk about later, about the opening scene of The Godfather, to me is so profound, and I actually think your brother and father I'm going to have them rethink the Godfather opening scene, because remember, it's at that scene where Bonacera, the undertaker, says to the Godfather on the opening scene, he realizes that his daughter, who had been gang raped, right, and that he was not, the boys did not get punished, and they laughed at him on their way out, right, the dishonor, the indignity. And here, wait for it, Harvey, and I forgot what your brother's older.
Eric. But let me just remind you of that scene when he says, you come to me asking for respect, but his treatment was such disrespect. You ever ask me, invite me to your house for a cup of coffee?
Yeah,
exactly. So and his name is Amerigo, which is such a great symbol. Amerigo Bonacera, symbol of America.
And here's the thing that I love about that. He's the undertaker, right?
Yep.
So he knows a lot about death. And he asks the Godfather, he says, first he has this line that I think all lawyers should remember. He says, it was at that point, when the boys are acquitted, that he said he turned to his wife and he said, if you want justice in America, you have to go to the Godfather.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that is a chilling line, right? And think about what a cognitive disconnect, right?
Well, to bring it back to Godfather 2, when in the opening scene with Senator Geary, he turns to Michael and he says, we're both part of the same hypocrisy.
Yes, and those scenes are parallel, but what's really interesting about that is that in that opening scene with Vito, he says to Bonacera, he says, what would you like me to do? And Bonacera basically whispers in his ear, I want you to kill the boys.
Yeah.
And the Godfather, who's a professional killer, says to the undertaker, this is something I cannot do because your daughter is alive.
That is not justice. He says, that is not justice. Your daughter is still alive.
Yes, and so here we get a lesson in morality, right? And a lesson in honor, morality, and justice from a professional killer to the undertaker, right? And he's saying, all right, I can get you justice, but I have to have it right. You get measure for measure. You don't get more than measure for measure. It's a very incredibly powerful, but you're saying that Michael never shows you that side, right? The more generous.
What you're pointing out is that in The Godfather 1, there's no gray area. I mean, the cops are corrupt. Every other mafia family is corrupt. The only one with a true sense of honor and the man of reason is Don Corleone. But Michael Corleone in the next generation is so full of ego. It's all about,
And
you know,
darkness.
loyalty
and darkness to him.
Yes.
His facial expression. He never
and-
smiles.
And you talk about how the movies open, right? We open in Godfather 1 at a real Italian wedding. Like I mean, you know, those people are from that world. Yeah. And they're dancing and they're playing that old guy who's doing I forgot how the song goes, but you know he's a real guy who's done that a million times at Italian weddings. Yeah. Yeah. And then we open in Godfather 2 in Nevada,
in Lake Tahoe.
In Tahoe, right? In this very staid, formal event with a band, and Frankie Pantangeli goes up to the band and he says, "Play the tarantella," and the clarinet player plays "Pop Goes the Weasel," which he doesn't even know the Italian song. He just plays an American cute song. Right. And Frankie Pantangeli's like, "What are these canapes? And get me some sausage. I need some food." Because everything has been stripped away in the second generation. All the pure Italian greatness, the food, the music, the culture has been stripped away. And that's what's so brilliant about the way they both open.
So I have another analysis that I want to throw at you for Godfather 2 that I think to add to yours, which is this. It is essentially 60 years of American history in 2 hours. Godfather 2 literally takes you from the second wave of immigration. Remember the first wave that brings you Jews and Irish and Polish and Russians was 1880s, 1800s. The second wave is early 20th century. Vito shows up, Ellis Island, they change his name, right? Just like we know that Feuerstein at some point, we should check with Harvey, it may have been Feuersteinitsky or Feuersteinowitz, but it
we changed it from Smith to Feuerstein. We just thought it would be easier.
They thought it would be easier for you in Hollywood with Feuerstein.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm thinking this movie opens up. It's like America, right? He's the Statue of Liberty. It takes you to Little Italy. It gives you the beginning of the crime syndicates. I love the fact that it even makes you think of Bobby Kennedy and the Senate racketeering.
Sure.
Right, of the 1950s.
Of course.
It takes you to the Cold War. You're on the eve of Fidel Castro showing up in this. Remember, we're a few months away from the Bay of Pigs. We're a couple years away from the Cuban Missile Crisis. This movie is so epic in its story. I'm just wondering whether you think there might be something to that the story, the other one, I'm not saying it's Chekhov, but it's a tighter fit. Godfather 1.
It's just an example how when Coppola was left to do his thing, he took so many risks. I mean, movies didn't toggle back and forth in time the way this movie does. And in fact, apparently, while he was editing, it did it too much. And his brilliant editor made sure that those stretches were longer because it was going back and forth too much. But I mean, to go back to 1901 and to go back to Corleone, Italy, and then back to America in the 50s and see, all that American history. And none of it's random, right? I mean, we see Cuba right on the eve of the revolution, a people yearning to be free, just like the Italians who were leaving to escape death, like Vito Corleone, who was going to be killed if he stayed in Corleone. People yearning to be free, and then the consequences of leaving.
Yeah, and you have the virtue of an actual truth, which was that the mafia owned the biggest hotels in Havana, and they actually had a relationship with Batista, or whoever was the president. And in fact, this was a true loss for this crime syndicate.
Yeah.
Right? They lost.
Well, Hyman Roth is based on Meyer Lansky.
Yeah, and so you have a real truth about what the Cold War brought. And I love what you just said before about yearning to breathe free.
Yeah.
Just reminded me of a scene that I think is very interesting. I probably would have tried to mention it later, but you just opened it up, the door there, which is that, remember that scene where they're celebrating Hyman Roth's birthday on a terrace, and Michael says, I just saw something very interesting today.
Yes.
Right? And he talks about how a rebel killed himself, jumped on a grenade in order to kill Batista's soldiers.
Yep.
And so Hyman Roth says, so what does that tell you? And he says, it tells you you can win, they can win. As
Yes,
if to say,
because
you
with
may
that
not-
level of passion, with that
That's
level
right.
of sacrifice, they're going to take over.
Yeah, and what interesting, and you made me think of this, Mark, is to say, Michael's not used to people killing and not getting paid for it.
Right.
Right? He's not used, he understands killing, but he understands that it's a business, which we're going to get to in a second. He doesn't understand this, what we see in Cuba, right? And it's interesting. It's like, must have been strange for him. He says to Hyman Roth, he says, the soldiers are getting paid, right? I think he says, the soldiers are getting paid, but the rebel was not. And that's when Hyman Roth, what does that tell you? So
Right, and it's like that thing where, you know, he had these people who were revolutionaries have nothing to lose.
Yes.
And they're getting nothing by doing it, so they're even scarier.
Yeah.
And Hyman Roth takes him aside and says, next time tell me that privately, because
Exactly.
Michael's ruining everyone there's confidence in this big deal that they're doing. And by the way, now that you've mentioned Hyman Roth, I just have to share another fun fact, which is that Hyman Roth was played by Lee Strasberg, the great acting guru of the Actors Studio, but he wasn't the first person that Coppola went to. Did you know that he went to Elia Kazan first?
Wow.
He sat down with Elia Kazan and they had lunch. And during the whole lunch in which he was offering him this role, which Elia Kazan passed on, he had his shirt off randomly. And so Coppola didn't get Elia Kazan in the role, but he stole that. And that's why you have Hyman Roth with his shirt off in the middle of that scene in Cuba.
But you want to hear a great irony? I had not known that, Mark, but here's a great irony. Here's a good catch. You're going to love this. Kazan, remember, is remembered in many circles as a guy who named names in the 1950s.
And the House Un-American Activities.
Exactly, the UAC committee. So here, if what you're saying is true, which was true, fascinating, right? He would have been playing the guy, right, that was trying to stop communism. It's just a great little irony.
That's amazing. That's an amazing connection.
Yeah, the one guy that went out of business because of communism was Hyman Roth. Right?
Yep. There's also a rumor that he went to Jimmy Cagney to play the role, which would have been amazing because it was like another generation of acting before the generation of acting that Lee Strasberg brought in with Marlon Brando and Al Pacino.
And that's what I was going to say. I was wondering, I don't want to get into those little anecdotes, but I'm wondering whether Pacino lobbied for Strasberg. Is that possible?
Absolutely. I'm sure it was because of their connection.
All right. Let's get to this other area that I think is super important about Godfather 2. I believe, you'll tell me what you think, Godfather 2 attempts to debunk one of the main themes of Godfather 1. By the way, this theme I'm about to say is something that is often repeated by people. It's one of the most quotable lines, which is the following. It's not personal, it's business, it's not personal. Right? Now, that is a big line that we hear it twice in Godfather 1, right? It comes up with Tony, with Tom Hagen and Sonny. Right? He said, your father would know that don't take it personally. It's business, Sonny.
Are you kidding? Wait, that's the greatest scene. I just have to walk us through it for 2 seconds.
Yes,
moment when Michael says, you get me a gun and I'll kill them both. And Sonny says, oh, this boy is going to kill them both. And he says, no, Sonny.
You're going to get blood on your Ivy League suit, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to get blood on your Ivy League suit. And Michael says, no, Sonny, we have people on the payroll, right? Reporters who would who would want a story about a corrupt cop. And that might be interesting to them, right? It's not personal, Sonny. It's business.
Right. So right, exactly. That scene. And then, so it's said twice. But in Godfather 2, it's also said. It's said in a different way by Hyman Roth.
Yep. He says, this is the speech. He says,
there
was this kid running molasses up to Canada, Mo Green. Later on, he had an idea to build a city for GIs to stop over on their way to the West Coast. That man was Mo Green, and there isn't even a plaque or a statue. And someone put a bullet in his eye. I wasn't mad. I wasn't angry. I didn't ask who gave the order because it had nothing to do with business.
And there's that great line, and I want you to do it for the audience. He said, because I realized this is the business we're in.
This is the business we've chosen.
The chosen, good.
Yes,
better, right.
exactly.
This is the business we've chosen. So, but
you know what's so amazing? Sorry, I love this stuff so much. So, finish your question.
No. So don't forget what you're going to say. I was going to say what's interesting about that is that Hyman Roth doesn't really mean it, unlike when it's said, right? Because he does.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
He believes that Michael did kill Mo Green, and it is personal for Hyman Roth.
It already was personal. He tried to kill him in his house with his wife.
And he's going to try to assassinate him in Havana, and he's going to steal his money. It's even worse. He's going to steal the suitcase that Fredo brought, and he's going to assassinate Michael. And here he is lecturing him that this is the business we've chosen, when in fact, he really is seeking vengeance for the death of his Jewish friend from the Lower East Side, Mo Green.
Right. Well, it's like when you're on a set in a scene and an actor says that someone's unprofessional because they're speaking over their line or they're overlapping. It's not about professional. It's just you want to say your lines. You want more lines, and you want them to have less. And it's a gray area between the personal and the business.
But here's what I want to talk about that scene. What I like about it is because I like that Roth does that, and I'll tell you why. Because The Godfather, as you and I, that's why we're having so much fun already. Is so iconic that it winds up in movies, and it actually is a subtext to Nora Ephron's "You've Got Mail." Do you remember that with Tom Hanks?
Of course, yeah.
Right, so throughout the movie, he's quoting lines from The Godfather, which is ironic because we're moving on to this line where he's going to say at the end, because remember, he's got the Barnes and Noble. He's going to take over her little tiny children's bookstore. You know which store I'm talking about, the one on 83rd Street.
Shakespeare and Company.
Right, exactly. Then there was the children's store on Amsterdam and 78th Street.
Okay.
Remember, there was that there, right? So, and right, of course, Shakespeare and Company on Broadway in 79th or whatever, 80th. So Efron sets up the scene where Tom Hanks says, finally, after all of the efforts to remember, he says something like, the Godfather is the I Ching. And she says, you can learn everything. And he quotes all the lines. And at the end, when we realize that she realizes the guy she's been having mail with, "You've Got Mail," is the guy that she's falling in love with, he put her out of business. He says to her, without any irony, he says, "I just want you to know," and he means it seriously, it was business, it's not personal, right?
Right.
So now we have the Godfather key line being said sincerely. And what I love is the line that Nora Ephron wrote, Mark. I'm sure you'll remember. She says the following. She says, and I think Meg Ryan kills it. She says, "I don't even know what that means." And then she says, "It was personal to me." Think about that one, right? She says, "I don't even know what the hell you're talking about."
That's a great moment.
Isn't it a great moment?
It's a great moment because, it's all personal.
Yes.
It's all personal. If you love what you do, if your heart is in what you're doing, it's why it's hard to take, my father's watching right now, it's why it's hard to take criticism, because you want to be thought that you're great, that you're nailing it, that your choices are right. But it's important to, be able to take notes. And what we do is so personal, and we put ourselves out there and we try to tell stories. And, so an agent tells you, they just went another way on that role. Oh, they just went another way. Well, I had played out the whole scenario where I'm at the Oscars thanking my parents. So, okay, they just went another way. Up yours. Yeah. It's personal.
Let me tell you something. I have a Feuerstein way that I'm going to roll out for you right now, and it works out much better for me. Yeah, and I just think what's interesting is that Meg Ryan is pulling the Hyman Roth, but she's being much more honest. She's saying, this nonsense, like we see this in life, right? What's the best example of it? Business, not personal, is the following. You and I, we grew up in New York, right? There are a lot of ruthless business people. By the way, your dad and brother represent a lot of them, right? Tough as nails business people. Guess what? We oftentimes hear that those very people, Mark, buy wings of hospitals, right? They send money to universities. They pay for soup kitchens. They do a lot of great charitable work, but they take the Godfather's approach, right? From Godfather 1, they say, look, business is business, and I make a lot of money, and I do a lot of nice things with it. Yeah, I get a tax deduction, but that's not the main reason. I want to do some nice things that's important to me. But it's interesting how Godfather 2, and I will say a little of You've Got Mail, is basically rejecting, it's debunking, it's saying, no, it's not okay, right? I think it's taking his position that we shouldn't lie about it. It is, as you just said before, everything is personal. There's no way to split it up.
Yes, but I also think you're hitting on something which is really interesting about Godfather 2, which is that, I don't know whether you fall on the side which says that power corrupts or the side which says that power reveals.
Right.
But I think those are two interesting takes on what happens with Michael Corleone. And, we never see Michael Corleone do that many noble, generous things in Godfather 2. In Godfather 1, he's a brilliant strategy guy.
Yeah.
But there's a moment I just want to call your attention to, which shows how Robert De Niro, back in the beginning of the 20th century, is shown to be a guy like the way you say tough businessmen doing good things. There's this little detail, which is that Don Fanucci, the guy in the white suit with the black tie, is walking around and he steals the dress off of Robert De Niro's, Vito Corleone's truck, and he's walking by a fruit cart in the way that Coppola recreated the Lower East Side, which is so incredible. And he's just walking by a fruit cart and he just grabs an orange and he just takes it. He doesn't even ask. He doesn't even acknowledge the guy at the fruit stand. He just walks by and takes it. And then they show Vito Corleone, who's now becoming powerful. He's got the Genko sign above his storefront, and he takes an orange and he turns to the guy and he says, how much? And he starts taking out cash, and the guy says, no, Mr. Corleone, you keep it. And you just see that he is a noble guy who's willing to pay for his fruit. And then there's that moment, we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I was going to add to that. Go ahead.
About fruit. That moment when Genko, I think it's Genko who owns the store and his best friend, and he has to fire Vito Corleone because Don Fanucci makes him hire his nephew. And he runs after Vito Corleone with a box of fruit, and he says, please take it. And Vito says, no, I can't take it. I'm sorry, I can't. And then he comes home to his wife with a pear.
I know.
One pear wrapped in paper. It's the most beautiful scene. He walks in, he unwraps that gorgeous pear, and he puts it on the table, and his wife reacts like, what a beautiful pear. And they hold hands, and he kisses her at the table, beautifully shot by Gordon Willis. And you just understand that this is a good man who has great values, who appreciates the simple beauty of a pear and his wife and his family.
So I want to add to that. It's even more virtuous than that, which is that when he rejects the box of fruit, right?
Yeah.
He says, no, I cannot take it. And he then says, you have always been good to me.
Yeah.
Right? And he says, and I will remember that. Right?
Yep.
Remember that scene of Vito's always saying, and I will remember if I...
Yeah, inside the store. He says that.
Yeah, he says, I will always remember. So he's like, even getting fired, he knows what's right. And he knows...
But also think about the self-realization of that. Like every self-help book could use that scene as an example of a man who knows he's going to be powerful someday, right? Yeah. He's got nothing. He doesn't have a pot to piss in. He doesn't have a home now. He doesn't have a job. And he says to this guy, like he's got leverage. Yeah. I will remember this someday. Yeah, and then of course he comes into himself.
And at that point, you're right, Mark. He doesn't even have the pear.
Right.
So what's interesting though is that let's go back to the business and personal, because there's also the Catholicism and the moral code, right?
Yeah.
How do you reconcile the truly devout Catholicism, and yet Murder Incorporated, right? That they recognize, and it's actually a very interesting other separation, because remember, Connie in Godfather 1 says to Michael, you bastard, you killed my husband on the same day you stood up to be his godfather in church.
Yes,
right?
Carlo.
Carlo, right? So as if this idea of this split between, well, we are good Catholics, and it's sort of, it's an interesting.
I mean, that theme is really covered very well by Scorsese and by Abel Ferrara, even more than Coppola. But absolutely, I mean, how brilliant that it's the San Gennaro Festival, and they're walking that cross through the center of whatever that is, Orchard Street, and at the moment we're celebrating Christ and all his values, Robert De Niro is dropping the pieces of the gun he just used to shoot Don Tomasino down the chimneys.
Right. But I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, just wondering about, you know, this idea that we believe there's a moral code that comes from, for many people, through their religion, right? Remember, we see it in Godfather 2, right? The boy is going through his first, communion, right?
Yep.
And that's what he's being celebrated. I think.
And of course, the brilliant sequence in The Godfather 1 is all happening during a baptism.
Exactly.
He's killing the heads of the 5 families while a boy is being baptized.
Right.
So the hypocrisy, the contradiction between what we say is moral and what we do is drawn so perfectly.
Yeah, I just think it's a very interesting split, another split within The Godfather. The morality.
Well, but Thane, I mean, I'm sure you're like me. Whenever you hear of an Orthodox, learned Jew from synagogue who happened to get arrested or something, it's shocking. How can a man who gets up every day and prays every morning and every night and is a good Jew and contributes to the synagogue and the community also be a thief? It boggles the mind.
It must have something to do, Mark, with this notion of secular versus the divine. That people who are religious, the most religious, see that they're operating under different moral code. Like it doesn't apply necessarily to their secular life. Their secular life is split from their religious life. And it's the way I think that they can make that separation, right? That I don't judge myself according to moral criteria in my secular life. I don't sweat it that way.
Yeah. And I think it all, there's that amazing scene between Tom Hagen and Frankie Pantangeli when he's in the prison, and they talk about the old Holy Roman Empire, and they look back on it like those were the glory days for our people, when religion and secular life were one. It was all under the rubric of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And they remember it fondly, and that's why they named all of the figureheads in the mafia on the old Holy Roman Empire. The capos, all the terms were named after them. And he says to Tom Hagen, it was a great time in history, and we had it good, right? We had it good. And Tom looks at him and goes, "Yeah, it was once." Knowing how far we've fallen from grace from those days when Don Corleone was alive.
It raises an interesting question, right? Because first of all, it's very subtle. We forget that, we think of the ancient Rome and Empire, we forget they're Italians.
Right.
Right. So we don't, there's a reason why they're making that association, because the Italians were part of that empire that was an Italian empire.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, I want to get to Pantangeli later, perhaps. Let me just jump a little back to something else that I want to cover with you, which is both films do something that Michael introduces. Vito doesn't do this. It's this settling all family debts, right? The language of both films come from Michael.
Yeah.
It's settling, right? That word, the terminology is a Michael Corleone line. The settling, that's when we will settle all of our debts. And again, they mix it up with the religion and the family and all of that. So one question is that, as you said earlier, the difference in Godfather 2 is that you can almost in Godfather 1 say, all right, I totally understand why they would kill all the 5 families, but Fredo?
Yeah.
And you have a brother, and there's something fascinating. There's that really great scene with the John Casal as Fredo.
Oh my God.
When he finally allows him to come back, and Casal says, He said, I was passed over.
Yeah, that amazing scene in the pool room,
Yes.
in that chair where he's like, it was something for me, Mikey. It was something for me.
Yeah, and he said, I'm the older brother.
Yes, I'm the older brother.
He said, did you ever consider that, right? And I remember when I saw that, I was thinking about that today a little, Mark, and I said, they sort of settle that up. Because, you know, in Godfather 1, I don't think people realize Fredo's the oldest. There's no reason. You think Sonny's the oldest. You don't.
Oh, yeah, I definitely thought Sonny was the oldest.
You only learn that in Godfather 2. But in Godfather 1, there's that really wonderful scene when the Godfather, when he's buying fruit, Vito sees that this is a hit, and there are cars with Tommy guns coming at him. And then all of a sudden, they hear the guns, and Fredo gets out of the car nervously and drops his gun.
Yes, of course.
He drops.
Of course. And as a great contrast to that moment is when Michael is standing in front of the hospital and he lights Enzo the baker's cigarette and he looks at his hand and you see he knows he's the one. He knows he's got it in his veins.
Yes. So what's interesting about that is when Fredo is pleading with his baby brother, do you understand why I betrayed you? Because there was something in it for me.
Yeah, for me.
And it's something very patronizing. Michael says to him, Fredo, you know that I always took care of you, which is a really patronizing thing to say to the older brother, right?
Yep,
He's
sure.
Going, what the hell are you talking about? I should be taking care of you.
And then he says, you're not a brother to me. You're not a friend. You're nothing to me.
Yeah. And but it's interesting, Mark, because you have a brother. There's also an earlier scene where Michael goes to the mother. And I swear, I don't know if they cut anything out of that scene. But Mark, I think the scene, unless it's just creepy, it sounds like Michael is implicitly asking his mother permission to kill her oldest child. Like, because he sits with her. It's a weird scene. He says,
he turns to her, he says, Ma, what was in Papa's heart?
Yes.
What was in Papa's heart? And he says, can he hurt his family by trying to be strong for his family? And she says, you can never lose your family. And he says, times are changing.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because he's almost asking for permission he can't ask her, I'm about to kill Fredo, your oldest child.
No, of course. No, and he knows he's going to kill Fredo for so long before he does it. And you know what's amazing? If you contrast the flashbacks to the 50s when it's Michael, there's Vito going back to Corleone, Italy to settle his debt. He talked about settling debts. Yeah. He goes back to Don Ciccio and he takes that enormous machete and he just cuts him right across his belly and kills him. And we have no issue with that, right? Of course. That guy killed his father, Andolini. He killed his brother, Paolo, who was hiding in the bushes. And at the opening of the movie, they kill him. But when you see Michael kill Fredo, it's the Sicilian revenge idea turned in on itself.
Yes.
Turned in on itself because he's going to kill his own brother, which is the thing the whole Sicilian system was built to protect, your family, imploding on itself. And that's the American, catastrophe. Not dream, but catastrophe.
You're right. Like the tragedy of
that the American dream bore this wealth and this great life for the Corleones, and now it's all coming to roost.
And Michael somehow, his analysis is that this is part of settling a debt, right? It's the twisted part of the morality play, right? That Michael somehow buys into the premise that all debts need to be settled, even if it means killing a family member.
Right. But the difference that makes Michael so messed up is when Don Ciccio is looking at a young boy, Vito Corleone, he says he's going to come back and he's going to kill me someday. Yes. And the mother says, please, I lost my husband. I lost my other son. Let him live. And Don Ciccio goes, no. And then she tries to kill him and she dies. But why? Michael knows Fredo's never going to try to kill him again. Fredo didn't even know what he was doing. You know, like when Willie Chichi is talking about the family in the trial and giving up all the information about the Corleone, he knows what he's doing. Fredo's a putz. He doesn't know. So why kill him?
Yeah. Also, it's forgetting the rules of what you said before. For instance, you just reminded me, in the Senate racketeering investigation, when Pantangeli realizes that his older brother, Vincenzo, has been brought in, I don't think I fully understood that scene until recent years when I did some more reading on it. I always thought the scene was that Michael was threatening Pantangeli by saying, I got your brother, and I'm going to kill him.
Oh, no, I didn't. No, I never thought that. Thane, and that's an amazing thought, because that could have been true. But for me, it was always just, and having an older brother who has a great moral compass, who's a terrific guy and businessman, and who I look up to, I can understand that moment when Frank Pantangeli just looks across the courtroom and he sees his brother he's a great businessman in that 2-mule town back in Italy, they say. And he just knows, I can't do this in front of my brother. I can't disgrace my family. Betray the family. So like Michael doesn't take away from that the truth of that scene, right? He should be taking away from that. And that's why I can't kill my brother. Right.
The reason I can't kill my brother is I just learned a lesson from Vincenzo, who with one look sent a message to his baby brother: you cannot disgrace the family by being a traitor to the family, right?
Right.
And you're gonna. I look at you sternly, and you'll see what I mean. And that's so interesting to me.
But Michael answers your issue, Thane, when he turns to Kay. In the most harrowing scene of the movie, when she tells him that she had an abortion.
Yeah.
And right before they get into what happened to the baby, Michael looks at her and she's asking, what happened, Michael? Yeah. Why did he just not testify against you? Why did he stop? What was it about? And he just says it was between the brothers, Kay.
Yeah.
And that seems to answer everything for Michael. It was between the brothers.
You're right.
So while one thing he uses to his own benefit, the other one is his own brother, and no one else can say anything. He felt betrayed, and he tells him on that floor, on that amazing dance floor in Cuba, I know it was you, Fredo. I know it was you. You broke my heart.
Broke my heart.
Oh.
I have to say, I forgot that line, Mark. That's a good catch. The one he says,
it was between the brothers.
Between the brothers. That's a great catch. Let's go back to that scene. You just reminded me about something. That scene is so fascinating. That scene is taking place in 1959. Yeah. Divorce was very rare in families. Divorce among Italian Catholics, unimaginable, right? 1959 must be unimaginable. I'll tell you what doesn't happen. She so naively believes. He says to her, did you think?
Yeah. Do you think I'm going to let you go? Yeah.
Take my children?
Take my children from me. Yes.
Right. Are you insane? Right. He says, did you think, as if to say, it never occurred to her that she had the ability to go hire a Harvey Feuerstein, a divorce macher, a real lawyer to do this, and says, look, we're going after the biggest crime family in the country. She's not stupid. She can't get a lawyer. Here's another example, right, where the legal system really wouldn't be able to intervene, right? Even in 1959, where the mother would always get custody.
Right, but Thane, I think what she says in that scene makes it about something bigger than getting custody of the children. She says, I knew you could never forgive me for doing that, and this all must end.
Yeah,
this all must end.
Yeah, I love that.
She's taking one for humanity. Yeah. She's saying this mafia thing, this disgusting, evil, corrosive, just horrible organization must die, and I'm going to kill it myself. I'm going to do what I can to put it in the ground.
Remember, abortion was in the news this week with the Supreme Court and in Texas, right? In 59, an abortion legal in Nevada.
You know what's fascinating about that?
How did she even get it? I don't.
So that's an interesting point, Thane. Just in terms of story in the movie, we have to believe, and I know this is a very esoteric point, but Tom Hagen knew.
Oh wow.
Tom Hagen knew, even when he's telling Michael, he knew, because how else did she get to the doctor?
Yeah.
Who the hell, how else could she have made it happen? Who took her to the doctor to make it happen? So when Tom Hagen is telling Michael about the abortion and he says, was it a boy? Which is so crazy to be asking that question when you've just lost your baby. Yeah. But he says, was it a boy? And he says, I don't know. Can't you give me a straight answer anymore?
And then he says, I don't know, which is so interesting.
Isn't that amazing? He says, I don't know.
He says, I don't know, but it's because he must have known, because Kay, for what you just said, I'm sure you're right. He's the lawyer. He's the fixer. Of course, right? He's got to handle it. It's Nevada. How's she going to make this work? But what's interesting is that she knows how to really, she knows how to dig that knife, because she said, and it was a boy, Michael. It was a boy, right?
Yep.
As if to say, I know this Sicilian masculine bullshit. This is going to, when I say I'm bringing this down, I'm not kidding. I killed a boy.
Yeah,
right?
she is torching the ground behind her. There's nothing that could happen. And how great is Robert Duvall? And I just have to share fun, because these performances are so amazing in the movie. And I have to tell you something about the Oscars of that year, because I don't know if you know who was nominated and how it broke down.
I know that Pantangeli was nominated, correct?
I don't know about that, but for Best Actor, you have to hear this.
Yeah.
The nominees that year were Jack Nicholson for Chinatown, Al Pacino for Godfather II, Dustin Hoffman for Lenny, Albert Finney for Murder on the Orient Express, and Art Carney for Harry and Tonto. Who do you think won?
It definitely was not Al Pacino.
It was Art Carney for Harry and Tonto.
That's right.
Which is only because Art Carney was a hero to the Academy for, the honeymooners and inventing television, basically. But what a travesty. I mean, how can you trust the Oscars after that?
Why is it that in both movies, since you brought up Tom, in both movies, Tom, who is an orphan, for the love of God, don't you just love him? He's an orphan. He's Irish. He learns how to speak Italian. He basically,
like Sonny found him in the street.
Exactly. He ends up being an adopted brother. But throughout both movies, but even worse in Godfather II, he is often pushed aside. You are not a wartime consigliere. So I'm wondering, is it because he's Irish and in the end you're not family because you're Irish? What is the statement that's being made? Here's another point. And you just made me you convinced me of something that I
by the way, part of Tom knowing about the abortion is one fact that makes it Michael never give him his due.
It's the scene, I didn't think about it until you just told me. The scene later when he says to him, I know you've been interviewing for a job at a hotel in Vegas.
Yep.
He said, do I have to tell you every time someone offers me a job? And then Michael says something very hurtful.
It's like vice president of the Houston Hotels.
Exactly. He says, well, if you want, you could take your wife and your children and your mistress and go to Vegas tomorrow.
Yep.
And then Tom says, Michael, why do you have to hurt me like that? Isn't that a sweet line? Michael,
why do you hurt me? Why do you hurt me?
Why do you hurt me like that?
And it's probably because of the fact that he also means it when he says, I kept a lot from you, Tom, because I love you too much. And he doesn't let Tom in on all of the Fredo and Johnny Ola and Hyman Roth shenanigans, doesn't let him in on all of it because he knows he's going to kill his brother eventually.
But in the early part of the movie, remember when he leaves to basically Miami Beach, right?
Yeah.
When he takes off, he literally says to Tom, it's very confusing. In the earlier scene, he asks Tom to step out when Meyer Lansky's henchman, Hyman Roth's henchman comes. He says, Tom, can you step out? And he said, I'll just be outside if you need me. And he's very hurt by that. That's when he said, there's some things I don't want to tell you, which is what you said.
Yeah.
But then after the assassination attempt, he puts Tom in charge of the whole family.
He makes him the Don.
The Don.
That's that great scene where they shoot through the window and Michael grabs Kay and pulls her onto the floor, and then he says, I want him alive. Find him alive. And then he tells Tom that he's the Don. And so there is this trust there and there is this love, but there's also this other side where Tom isn't telling Michael everything. And by the way, you mentioned Sonny. I just want you to know another fun fact. You see that James Caan is in the final scene, right?
Yeah.
You know that final scene, which which when I watched it, I thought this must have been on the cutting room floor, and Coppola just but it wasn't. It was fully intended to shoot that scene for Godfather 2, and in order to shoot that one scene, James Caan demanded his entire salary from Godfather 1, and Paramount gave it to him. And same with Marlon Brando.
Oh, wow.
They agreed to give him a salary, but Brando didn't show up.
Oh, and that's why
Brando didn't show up. That's why they all go out to the door and disappear to pretend that he was at the door, because he just didn't show up that day. Okay, Marlon, that's okay. It's just Godfather 2. It's no big deal.
He didn't show up. No, because I was going to say, that's funny. He's not even in the scene and he got paid.
And it's an amazing scene, that final scene, because you see that Michael has always been his own man. Sonny says, why do you want to protect your country instead of your family? And he says, I do. I enlisted. I signed up to be a soldier.
He says to Tom something. He says, I don't see it that way. Right? He said, your father,
exactly.
Right? It's an interesting line. He says, your father has plans for you. He says, plans for my future?
Yep.
Right? He says, my future?
Yep.
Right? You know, it's like Harvey Feuerstein saying, Mark, I want you to be in the family business. I want you to be a lawyer. And you say,
yes, here I am, actor.
He's an actor. So, Mark, I'm gonna give you a line that you already gave a line. I'm gonna say to you the following. Mark, why do you hurt me so? Ready? You know why I'm telling you this line? Because we're having just a phenomenal conversation. But I fear people are gonna remember you giving out all these perfect imitations of Godfather lines. What people are going to remember from this hour is, oh my God, you should have seen Feuerstein. He should have been.
Well, maybe I'll get cast in Godfather 4. Who knows? Thane, this could be big for me.
I got to tell you, Mark, one of our guests was Andy Garcia.
Oh my God, he's so great. The Untouchables. Better than you stinking Irish pig.
We did a film that he made with Sidney Lumet called Midnight or something over Manhattan or something, but the audience didn't want to hear about that. They wanted to hear about Godfather 3.
Yep.
Honestly.
By the way, I got to tell you one more thing about Godfather 3, because you mentioned it. I'm sorry, Thane.
Go
but
ahead.
Did you know that Godfather 3 was supposed to be all about Robert Duvall? And it was meant to be. It was all meant to be Robert Duvall versus Michael Corleone, Tom Hagen. In each Godfather, they kill Sonny in 1, they kill Fredo in 2, and it was going to be the death of Tom Hagen in Godfather 3, and he just wanted his $5 million, and they wouldn't pay him, and they had to rewrite the whole movie.
I got to tell you, that is such a better story than the George Hamilton thing.
I mean, can you imagine, instead of George Hamilton, if it was Robert Duvall and Tom Hagen and versus Al Pacino?
Also, Mark, it fits into all the backstory you and I were just talking about, because Robert Duvall, Tom has a lot of history here. He's the one that says at the dinner table, your father has plans for you. He's the one that introduces business, not personal. He's the one that says, Michael, why do you hurt me? And now you're saying it would have been like the two Dons going at it.
Duvall versus Pacino, the two greatest actors in the 70s.
And the guys pushed away as consigliere, right? Both in Godfather 1 and in Godfather 2.
That's right.
He said, what did he say? He says, why didn't I have a wartime consigliere like my father?
Yep.
But
Tom is pretty dark. There's a scene we haven't discussed with the sex worker.
Yes, I'm about to talk about this. Yeah,
when they get Senator Geary, and you realize when you see, I think it's Al Neary, one of the henchmen, coming out of the bathroom, you realize it was Al Neary who put the senator out, drugged him, he passed out, and then killed this poor woman. And Tom Hagen says she's got no family, she's got no life. No one will ever know. And it's the most evil, sinister thing. The scene that really doesn't hold up over time because it's just so awful.
Yeah, it doesn't. But I will say it does this, which is the opening scene, the equivalent of the Bonacera scene, is the scene with Gary in Michael's study. Because that's when he says to a senator, he says something like, you'll do the line better, of course, but he says something like, we are both part of the same hypocrisy, but never make the mistake that my family is part of it, which is a lie. Because the point that you said earlier reminded me of it. Vito Corleone settles the debt by going all the way back to Sicily to kill the person that killed his family. He brings his family on vacation.
Right. Yep.
Right? It's everything is family. It's not like he.
Yep. I'm just going to take an hour. I just got to take an hour. I'm going to go kill Don Ciccio. I'll be back at the pool by 5. We'll have a drink. It's all good.
Isn't that exactly what happened?
Yes,
right?
yes. But wait, in that scene with Senator Geary, how about the moment when he says, I'm not, so you can have my answer. I want to have your answer by tomorrow at noon. And Michael says, you can have my answer right now if you like. And he says, okay, fine. He goes, my offer is this, nothing. And I would like it if you could put up the money yourself for the gaming license.
Yeah, I love that.
Is that the best?
Yeah, it is great. It's also the coldness with which he delivers it, right? Without irony. I'm not kidding. I'm telling you what I'm asking you to do. But it does make you think of something else, which is the scene in Godfather 1, which I would say is where, to me, this is where Michael loses his virginity. He turns from the guy we saw in the uniform that we like, buying gifts for Christmas with Kay.
He's a war hero. He's a war hero.
And he shows up later after coming back from Sicily, and he shows up and he's wearing his mafia suit. And she says, Michael, I thought you didn't want to be in your father's business. And then he said, look, my father's just like any important man, a president or a senator. And she says something like, Michael, do you know how naive you sound? Senators don't have people killed. And then he says, okay, do you know how naive you sound?
Yeah,
and of course,
amazing.
Frank Geary, right? Geary is involved in a murder plot. He doesn't seem to mind, right? It may be true that Neary is the guy that does the killing, but
he did it.
Yeah,
it was all a setup. It's all a setup.
But the senator doesn't know that. Right?
No.
The senator might think
he's crying. He thinks he doesn't know what the hell just happened.
Exactly. He figures it could have been me. I don't know. There's also a very interesting thing about that scene about the hypocrisy line, because, of course, then we see that from this calculated thing that Tom does, Geary becomes a protector.
And he gets and Geary speaks at the hearings and talks about Columbus and Enrico Fermi.
Exactly. All the wonderful Italian Americans in the world.
Yes.
But there's another thing that, and then we'll have to get to some, maybe from the question and answer, but we could do this for almost another hour. But
I'm having the best time, Thane.
It's really fun, Mark. Thank you for this. You're such a great guest. There's this great scene. I don't know, did you ever see the full director's cut of Godfather 1?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you know that the horse head in Waltz's bed never really made sense until you see the director's cut? Why? Because Tom Hayden wouldn't have been able to plot out the killing of the horse. He leaves the dinner table. How did he set that up? Right. He couldn't have set that up. He was leaving. He says Don Corleone insists on hearing bad news immediately. Right. So I have to go to the airport. I need a car. Right. So he goes. He couldn't have planned that. And the reason is we learn in the director's cut that Waltz is a kind of these guys are degenerates. Right, Waltz had in the movie, we see he's got a little 13-year-old Shirley Temple and her mother living in the house. And I don't know if you remember the scene. There's two scenes that get cut of Godfather 1. And what we realize is that Waltz is creepy. He's like, I'm sorry.
Oh my God. He says he has that speech at the dinner. He goes, and she was the greatest piece of ass. And I've had them all. And
we see later when then Tom's walking up, he looks up and he sees a little girl's face who looks miserable, right? So Tom goes back and tells the Godfather, there's a scene, and the Godfather has this great line. Vito is listening to Tom tell the story, and then the Godfather, again, it's just like out of the early scene with Bonacera that says, these people are disgusting. He says something like that. They're degenerates. And again, it's like,
but doesn't Jack Waltz turn to Tom on the set of that soundstage and say, I don't care how many grease balls you have to pull out of the woodwork. I ain't no band leader. Yeah, I heard that story.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
It's interesting because it's like there is a separation between the Italians and their family, with the exception of the dark side of Michael killing Fredo. But other than that, they really do try to, as you said, look at Vito in Little Italy. He helps out the woman who's with the dog, right?
Yeah.
He gets her right.
Oh my God, how great is that Don Roberto when he can't open the door? It's amazing.
Yeah, right, and everyone, right, the Abe Vigoda, they're all laughing. The young versions of them. Are like,
Tessio.
Right, Tessio.
And then De Niro keeps looking at Tessio and he goes, "Oh, no, I'm going to lower the rent. It's $5. And then he looks again. He goes, he looks at Tessio and then he goes, "I'm going to lower the rent $10. No, $10. Don't go beyond." He says, "You want to have a cup? Great. You want to?" By the way, he speaks 8 words of English apparently in the entire movie. Robert De Niro speaks 8. The rest is all in Sicilian. He studied Sicilian and Italian for 4 months to prepare for the role. And he says, "You want to have a cup of coffee?" And Don Roberto goes, No, I gotta go. And he's terrified.
And that's before, right? That's the scene before they lift the sign, which says
Genco, which is named after Genco Abbandonato, the guy who gave him the job. And Abbandonato in Italian means abundance, which is the abundance of America. These fruits, they're all symbolic. And oranges symbolize memory in Italy. So it's all intentional by Coppola.
And you know what I didn't know until I saw the director's cut of Godfather 1 is that Genco was the consigliere, but he's dying of cancer in a hospital room. And he was when Sonny is yelling at Tom, "Why didn't I get a wartime consigliere?" I think he says, like Genco.
Like Genco, yes.
So he's saying the guy in the olive business, my father's best friend, he didn't go to law school, but he's really a good consigliere.
For sure.
And a wartime consigliere.
For sure. And you talk about all these Italian characters. I just wanted to point out the casting of each of the people that Fredo is with, that blonde, sort of bimbo-like character who says these Italians don't, they don't know how to treat their women. And what's his name? Merle.
Right.
Right? Merle is this American playboy type. Like he made an effort to cast Kay, and Kay is just the most American woman you could imagine, Diane Keaton. As a contrast to the Italian, the Italians were watching.
So as much as I don't want to do this, we're at the very end. So let me just ask. I'm going to ask one question I can only take one, but I do want to do something that I've never done before, which is I would never normally take a comment, right? Normally I only would take a question, but this from an anonymous attendee writes the following: not a question, but just wanting to compliment.
Just a criticism.
Yeah, right. He says, "I would love to see Godfather 4. He says, "Not a question, but just wanting to compliment Mark on being one of the greatest and most animated conversations on Essential Cinema guests I've seen so far." I love
that is so nice. And I just want to say, Dad, thank you so much for writing that in. That was really very lovely of you.
Here's a question that is morally complicated. Comes from Michael Fishman. Mr. Fishman's question is, Michael doesn't kill Fredo himself. What does that say about his character? What do you think?
Well, when we're in the Senate hearings, they ask him that exact question. Did you ever, they asked that question of who is it? Willie Chichi. Willie Chichi. Did you ever get a direct order from Michael himself? And he says, "No, I never got a direct order from Michael." And I mean, it's just smart criminal business to not have your hands dirty.
He says the joke. He says, "I was a buffer."
Yeah.
He said,
right. Yeah, they had a lot of buffers.
It had a comic moment, right?
Yeah, it was a great moment.
It cracks up the entire committee, right?
But I mean, it's clear that it's just to keep your hands clean and not leave a trail of blood behind you. But how unbelievable is that moment when it starts with a shot on the mother in the coffin. Then we see Connie, which is played by Talia Shire, who won an Academy Award for Godfather II for Best Supporting Actress. And then she asks Tom Hagen, first Fredo says, can I talk to Michael? And Tom Hagen says, not a chance. And then Connie says, where's Michael? And he says, he's in the boathouse. So she can talk to him. She goes, she begs Michael. She says, Michael, I hurt myself as a way to get back at you. but please, I'm here now. I'm here with you. Please be nice to Fredo. And then in the sickest, most cruel, like operatic act, Michael Corleone walks into that wake and he goes up to Fredo and he takes him in his arms and he hugs him while looking at Al Neri, his henchman, and giving him the nod. And Al Neri, you can't believe it's happening. Al Neri just gives a little nod like, yep, okay, got it. I will be killing him at 6 o'clock.
I wonder whether Mr. Fishman's point, if he's making, it's being rhetorical. I wonder whether he's thinking, and that'll be the last thing we'll talk about, is whether by not actually getting his hands dirty, it's different. Or is it different? Maybe it's creepier and worse that you're never willing to, you're never going to be in that job. Even though, remember, Michael's, you just said before, his hand didn't shake, which means he knows how to kill. His hand didn't shake with the gun, but he's not actually in maybe World War II is the last time he actually killed anybody with a gun. And I'm wondering whether Mr. Fishman's point is that it's easier to be a killer if you have distance, right? That there's an emotional distance between giving an order and actually holding a gun. That's like the argument about silencers on a gun, right? That you should say silencers sort of emotionally distance you because guns supposed to make a lot of noise, right? So if you put a silencer on a gun, it gives you, like, you want the gun to make a lot of noise and to kick back as if to give you a sense of what you're about to do, right? And I'm wondering whether Mr. Fishman's point is also something about, I hadn't thought about it before, that maybe there is something different about not getting your hands dirty. It's simply easier to kill from a distance. This point was made by Bill Maher after 9/11, right? When he said that, I don't know if you remember this, that's how Bill Maher lost the Politically Incorrect on ABC. He made a comment, he said that George W. Bush said that the 9/11 terrorists were cowards. And Bill Maher on ABC, when the politically, I don't know if you remember this, Bill Maher says on that show, and then Disney fired him the next day. He said, I don't think that's true at all. He said, I think it's cowardly to fire a missile from like a boat thousands of miles away and not see it, as opposed to flying a plane into the World Trade Center, right? So the next day, George W. Bush's press secretary, I remember Fleischer, said something very creepy. He said something like, in this time after 9/11, people should be very careful about what they say, because that makes it sound like that you're supporting a terrorist. And then ABC fired him. HBO picked him up. But it was because it's an interesting point. It's Mr.
Well, Thane, you're making you're seeing the deeper question in this question, and I love it. And I think I'm thinking of a great, one of my favorite movies that could have been the one we talked about, and it can be the next time, but Paths of Glory by Stanley Kubrick, where he shows the different levels of hierarchy in war. And you see these colonels in these ivory towers walking around discussing, the fate of the men in the trenches, the guys in the dirt, of which, what was it? Kirk Douglas plays the lead soldier who's in the trenches with his soldiers, and these colonels in the ivory tower deciding their fate. And like Tom Hagen and Frank Pantangeli talk about, everything was based on the old Holy Roman Empire, the Roman legions, the regimes, the capos, the soldiers. So there was this hierarchy. And, it's funny, in our business, our business is built around that system. The Teamsters, they all have these different levels of what your job description is. And it's a way of organizing an institution and a business. And I think it's also a way of insulating the guy at the top.
It makes it bureaucratic and systematic. Mark, I have to tell you something before we say goodnight. Our folks team is probably shocked because we have a rule. It's like sort of one rule that Thane has, which is we finish at 60 minutes. We are in the 71st minute, Mark Feuerstein.
Yes.
We've been doing this for 15 years. You were the only guy.
I'm so honored, and I think
honored.
it's really
We
just because
never-
we're talkative, loquacious, garrulous, and verbose. But
Yeah, well,
I'm honored and
but
flavoured, and thank you so much,
you
Thane, for
deserved
letting
it,
me
Mark.
go over. I've had the best time.
No,
The best
it was
time.
a blast. Obviously, there was a reason we took an extra 11 minutes. Before we say goodnight to Mark, let's see, what do we've got? We've got, yes, of course, always donate to folks. We haven't been charging during the pandemic. We have a global audience, so there's ways to do it with text or online. We've got a whole nother rollout of events that we'll be doing in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. The series is wildly popular, and I think Mark Feuerstein and Godfather II made it even more popular. Mark, please come back. All right, please.
I would
back.
love to come back, Thane. This was the highlight of my week, my month, my year, to talk about this movie with you, who is obviously so learned and who did your research. So much fun. It was great.
You are so incredibly charming and smart, and that's why we went over, because it was you were irresistible. All right, everyone. Thane Rosenbaum for folks. See you again. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye, Thane. Great to talk to you.
Good night, Mark. Thanks so much.
Good night.